5 years after Elara Vane vanished from the Alpha King's court, she returned through the servants' entrance with her head bowed and another woman's name on her lips. Mara Vale, she told the palace steward. The lie came smoothly. She had practiced it for months. Her plain gray maid's dress was deliberately forgettable. Her once light hair had been darkened and pinned into a severe knot, and beneath the clean scent of soap lingered the bitter herbal mixture she had rubbed along her wrists and throat before dawn. It dulled the personal scent Rowan would have known once. Elara followed the other new servants through the lower corridors without looking toward the grand staircase. She had not come back for him. That was the first rule. The second was simpler. Find the old records, recover whatever remained of the evidence that had driven her from the palace 5 years ago, and disappear before anyone connected Mara Vale to the woman everyone believed was dead. She could survive a few days. She had survived 5 years. Keep moving, the senior maid ahead of her muttered. Elara obeyed, but her steps faltered when 2 footmen nearby began speaking quietly. His Majesty refused another proposal yesterday. Again, as if that's surprising. He hasn't seriously considered one since Lady Elara died. Her stomach tightened. Died. Elara had expected resentment, perhaps even relief. She had never allowed herself to imagine grief. She turned the next corner and stopped. Across the gallery hung a portrait she had never seen before. Her own face looked back at her. Not Mara's darkened hair and lowered eyes, but Elara as she had been at 22, painted in pale blue beside a palace window. A small brass plaque beneath the frame carried her name. She stared until breathing hurt. Rowan had believed it. Whatever evidence had been left behind after her escape, it had convinced him she was dead. She had disappeared because she believed staying would force him to choose between her and his kingdom. Instead, she had left him mourning a grave that did not exist. Mara. Elara turned sharply. The head housekeeper stood behind her, holding a folded duty sheet. One of the king's chamber maids has taken ill. I need a replacement. Cold moved through Elara's body. Surely there were dozens of servants. I'm new, ma'am, and therefore available. The woman handed her the sheet. You'll report to the private royal wing at sunrise. Elara stared at the written assignment. She had entered the palace intending to remain invisible beneath its lowest ceilings. Tomorrow morning, she would walk directly into Rowan Thorne's chambers. At sunrise, Elara stood outside the private royal wing with her fingers locked around a breakfast tray and reminded herself that she had returned for records, not memories. The bitter herbs beneath her collar still masked her scent. Her hair was still dark. Her name was still Mara Vale. None of that stopped her heart from striking painfully against her ribs when the chamber door opened. Rowan Thorne stood beside a desk crowded with military reports. 5 years had sharpened him. His shoulders seemed broader beneath his dark coat, his face harder. The controlled stillness of an Alpha King settled more deeply into him. There were faint lines beside his eyes that Elara did not remember. He looked at her once. No recognition. Relief came first. Pain followed immediately. Breakfast, Your Majesty. His gaze returned to the papers. There. Elara crossed the room and placed the tray beside him. Her hands knew this room even after 5 years. She began arranging the dishes, then saw his cup sitting dangerously close to the reports. Without thinking, she moved it. Rowan's hand stopped above a page. Elara froze. Why did you do that? She kept her eyes lowered. Do what, Your Majesty? Move the cup. Because once, years ago, he had reached blindly for one while reading and spilled tea across 3 days of military correspondence. It seemed too close to the papers. Silence. Elara turned toward the windows. Morning light flooded through the western curtains, throwing a bright stripe directly across Rowan's desk. Again, instinct moved before caution. She closed them and opened the eastern curtains instead. Behind her, Rowan said, Who told you? Her pulse stumbled. Your Majesty? That I prefer the eastern. Curtains open in the morning. No one. Now she could feel his attention. Elara forced herself to continue working at the measured pace expected of a servant. What is your name? Mara Vale. Mara. Hearing him say the false name hurt more than it should have. She risked one glance upward. His expression remained controlled, but something had changed in his eyes. Not recognition. Something more uncertain, as though she had reminded him of a thought he could not quite recover. He could not know her. The herbs had done their work. 5 years had passed, and grief itself protected her now. A dead woman could resemble a living maid in 100 small ways without becoming possible. Rowan finally looked away. When Elara finished, she carried the empty dishes toward the door. Wait. She stopped. Rowan addressed the housekeeper waiting outside. Keep Mara assigned here. Elara tightened her grip on the tray. Yes, Your Majesty. He had unknowingly done exactly what she feared most. He had chosen to keep her close. Later, while dusting the private study, Elara found herself alone beside Rowan's desk. She had no intention of searching it. The records she needed would be elsewhere, and careless curiosity could destroy her mission before it began. Then she saw the folded scrap of paper beneath a leather document weight. She recognized her own handwriting. Years ago, she had written Rowan a brief reminder about a council appointment and teased him for pretending he never forgot anything. It should have been discarded the same day. Instead, the paper was softened at its folds and worn at the edges. He had kept it. Elara stepped back as if the desk had burned her. She had told herself for 5 years that leaving had been necessary. She had imagined Rowan angry, perhaps wounded, but ultimately safe. She had never imagined her portrait hanging in his palace or an insignificant note surviving beneath his hand. Her gaze dropped to the council documents stacked nearby. A black wax seal marked the top page. Elara went completely still. She knew that insignia. 5 years ago, it had appeared on correspondence connected to the faction that convinced her remaining beside Rowan could cost him his throne. Now it was sitting on his desk again. Whatever she had fled from had not died with Elara Vane. It had survived her, and someone inside Rowan's court was moving it toward him again. Whatever she had fled from had survived her, and someone inside Rowan's court was moving it toward him again. That realization changed the terms of Elara's return. Leaving quickly was no longer enough. If the same faction was active after 5 years, she needed to understand what they wanted before she disappeared again. Her position in Rowan's private household gave her access she could never have gained as an outsider, but it also placed her under the eyes of the one man most capable of recognizing what she was trying to hide. So Elara learned to become useful without becoming memorable. She carried messages, cleared trays, prepared rooms before meetings, and listened only when servants were expected not to hear. She stole nothing. Instead, she watched. Council drafts discarded for copying carried names. Messenger schedules revealed which nobles communicated outside formal sessions. Filing numbers showed when documents had been moved from one chamber to another. Small irregularities began forming a pattern. 3 mornings later, Elara entered a council antechamber to find correspondence arranged for 2 separate delegations. One sealed packet had been placed with the wrong stack. She recognized the classification mark immediately. If carried into the next room, confidential military information would reach men who had no authority to see it. Elara moved it to the proper pile just as Rowan entered. His gaze went from her hand to the packet. Why did you move that? The question was becoming dangerously familiar. It was misplaced, Your Majesty. How would a new maid know that? Elara looked at the markings as though she had only just noticed them. The symbols were different. Rowan picked up the packet. His expression revealed nothing. Most servants would not know the symbols mattered. Then I was fortunate. His eyes rested on her for a moment too long. Were you? Elara lowered her head. Yes, Your Majesty. He let her go, but she felt his attention follow her to the door. Pretending ignorance was harder than she had expected. Once, Rowan had trusted her judgment enough to ask what she saw in documents others ignored. Now she had to watch dangers pass within reach and calculate exactly how much intelligence Mara Vale was allowed to possess. Yet Rowan kept drawing her closer. He began asking specifically for Mara when papers needed organizing or meals were brought during long negotiations. Elara told herself it was because she worked quietly. Then she noticed something worse. He seemed calmer when she was there. She noticed him too. He still forgot to eat when council sessions ran long. One evening she replaced an untouched heavy supper with bread, sliced fruit, and broth he could consume while reading. Rowan looked at the simpler tray, then at her. Did I request this? No, Your Majesty. Then why? Because yesterday's supper returned to the kitchen untouched. Something almost softened in his face. You pay too much attention, Mara. Elara's chest tightened. It is my work to pay attention. The following day, carrying a heavy linen basket aggravated the ache in her wrist. She concealed it until Rowan saw her shift the basket to her other arm. Put that down. She obeyed. It's nothing. I did not ask whether it was nothing. He called for the housekeeper and instructed her that Mara was not to be assigned unnecessary heavy work while her wrist hurt. Elara wanted to protest. Instead, she stared at the floor and remembered why kindness from him had always been more dangerous than power. By the end of the week, her investigation produced a name attached repeatedly to the pattern she had been tracing: Lord Garrick Voss. Voss had influence across the council and connections to the same succession faction whose insignia Elara had recognized on Rowan's desk. More troubling was his current campaign. He was pushing aggressively for Rowan to accept a treaty marriage that would draw Voss's political allies closer to both the crown and the succession. Elara was carrying fresh linens through the outer study when Voss emerged from a private council meeting. She moved aside immediately. "My lord." He passed her, then stopped. Elara felt every muscle in her body tighten. Voss turned slowly. His gaze traveled from her darkened hair to her lowered face. For one terrible instant, neither of them moved. There was no certainty in his expression, no recognition she could prove, only disturbance. The look of a man who had encountered something his memory insisted he should understand. Elara lowered her head further and waited. At last, Voss walked away. She did not breathe normally again until his footsteps disappeared. Rowan was not the only person in this palace who might remember Elara Vane. And unlike Rowan, Garrick Voss had reasons to fear discovering that the dead woman had come home. And unlike Rowan, Garrick Voss had reasons to fear discovering that the dead woman had come home. Elara became more careful after that. She avoided Voss whenever his council duties brought him near the royal wing, renewed the bitter herbal mixture every morning without fail, and measured every word she spoke around Rowan. None of it stopped the dangerous familiarity growing between them. 3 nights later, a council session stretched well beyond midnight. Elara entered Rowan's study after the last advisors had gone and found him standing beside the window, one hand pressed against the back of his neck. "You should sleep, Your Majesty." Rowan glanced at her. "Do all maids give their king orders?" "Only when the king mistakes exhaustion for duty." The words escaped before she could soften them. Silence filled the room. Rowan turned fully toward her. Elara's stomach dropped. Years ago, she had argued exactly that way whenever he worked himself beyond reason, not with those precise words, but with the same stubborn distinction between service and self-destruction. "Where did you learn to speak like that?" he asked. "Like what?" "As though duty has limits." Elara lowered her eyes. "Experience, perhaps." "What kind of experience?" "Nothing interesting." Rowan studied her. "You have an unusual amount of nothing interesting in your past, Mara Vale." She forced a small, respectful smile. "Then I should make an excellent servant." "Where did you live before coming here?" She gave him the history she had prepared: minor households, temporary work, years spent moving where employment was available. It contained enough truth around the edges to survive casual examination. Rowan listened without interruption. "And before that?" he asked. Elara hesitated. "I would rather not speak about those years." An Alpha King could have demanded an answer. Rowan possessed rank, authority, and enough power to make refusal difficult for almost anyone in his court. Instead, he looked away. "Then I won't ask again." The simple acceptance struck harder than suspicion would have. Elara had returned prepared to defend her secret against his authority. She had not prepared for him to respect it. Later that same night, she carried fresh water to his chambers and heard something fall inside before she knocked. When no answer came, she entered cautiously. Rowan was awake, sitting at the edge of his bed, breathing hard. A cup lay broken near his feet. His face had gone pale beneath the dim light. Elara knew immediately what she was seeing. She also knew she should leave. Instead, she set the water down and moved the broken pieces away from his bare feet. "Your Majesty." Rowan looked at her without seeming to see her. Elara placed the water within reach and said quietly, "Look at the window. Tell me what you can see." His gaze shifted toward it. "The courtyard. And beyond it." A pause. "The eastern tower." "Good. Stay here. Not wherever you were." His breathing gradually slowed. Elara realized too late that she had used the same practical method she once used when pressure overwhelmed him during the worst months of his early reign. Rowan realized something too. His eyes fixed on her. For one suspended moment, Elara thought everything was over. Then he said, "Someone used to do that." She could barely make herself answer. Do what? Bring me back before I disappeared too far into my own head. He looked toward the dark window. She vanished 5 years ago. Elara remained still. I'm sorry. Everyone is. His voice held no anger, only exhaustion. They think grief becomes smaller if enough years are placed around it. Elara's throat tightened. Rowan continued, I thought she left because I failed to understand how frightened she was. Then they told me she was dead. He looked down at his hands. For 5 years, I have wondered whether she tried to tell me something I was too powerful, too occupied, or too certain to hear. Elara wanted to tell him that he had heard more than she allowed herself to say. She wanted to tell him that she had been the one who chose silence. Instead, she stood beside him wearing another woman's name. Rowan lifted a hand toward her, almost unconsciously. His fingers stopped before touching hers. He lowered it. You should go, Mara. Elara left before her face betrayed her. The next afternoon, while changing linens in the private study, one of her gloves caught against a drawer handle and slipped halfway from her hand. Rowan entered at that exact moment. Elara pulled the glove back into place, but not before his gaze dropped to the small pale burn scar beside her thumb. He stopped. Elara waited for the question. None came. Rowan simply walked past her and sat at his desk. Yet the silence had changed. That evening, after Elara left the royal wing, Rowan summoned the keeper of sealed records. He requested the complete investigation into Elara Vane's disappearance and presumed death. For the first time since Mara Vale entered his chambers, Rowan was no longer merely haunted by resemblance. He had begun asking whether the impossible might have been buried inside the truth all along. He had begun asking whether the impossible might have been buried inside the truth all along. The sealed investigation reached Rowan before breakfast the next morning. He read it once, then again, slower. 5 years ago, searchers had recovered Elara's cloak, a personal possession, and other evidence along the route she was believed to have taken from the capital. A body had later been associated with the disappearance. Yet beneath the certainty of the official conclusion was a fact Rowan had somehow never been forced to confront. No incontrovertible physical identification had established that the dead woman was Elara Vane. By midday, one possibility had become impossible to dismiss. Elara might have survived. Rowan said nothing to Mara. That frightened her more than questions would have. His attention followed her differently now, not with certainty, but with deliberate patience. He was watching. Elara could feel it whenever she entered his study, whenever she spoke, whenever her hands moved automatically toward some familiar task. She forced herself to continue. The restricted archive lay beyond the administrative wing, accessible to servants during cleaning hours, but not meant for their curiosity. Elara waited until routine work brought her there legitimately, then used the brief privacy to trace the filing references she had memorized. She found correspondence carrying the same factional connections she remembered from 5 years earlier. The surviving documents confirmed part of her fear. Men aligned with Voss had discussed using Rowan's attachment to her as leverage in a legitimacy crisis. References to allied pacts, succession pressure, and public confidence appeared repeatedly. It was enough to prove the danger had existed. It was not enough to prove who had ordered it. The document that should have connected the operation to its source was missing. Elara checked the sequence twice. A gap remained where the crucial record should have been. Then she noticed the access notation. Someone had opened this collection recently. She stepped back from the shelf. The past was not merely preserved here. Someone was still touching it. Elara left the archive corridor and nearly collided with Rowan. He stood several paces away, alone. His expression was unreadable. Mara, Your Majesty, what were you doing there? Cleaning. Rowan glanced toward the restricted corridor. That is not where your duties were assigned. Elara's mouth went dry. I must have misunderstood. It was a poor lie, and they both knew it. Rowan looked at her for a long moment. What are you looking for? This was the opening she had feared and wanted in equal measure. She could tell him. She could say her own name, and in 5 years of silence. But the missing document changed everything. Without it, Voss and his allies could deny the conspiracy, turn her secret return into evidence of manipulation, and recreate the political crisis she had sacrificed everything to prevent. Nothing, she said. Something in Rowan's face closed. He did not order her arrested. He did not demand the truth. He simply stepped aside. Then return to your duties. Elara walked past him carrying the weight of the first lie that felt like a betrayal of the trust Mara had earned. That evening, Rowan remained in his study long after the council dispersed. Elara brought tea and prepared to leave immediately. "Stay a moment." She stopped near the door. Rowan did not look at her. "The palace has been quieter these last 5 years." Elara waited. "People assume kings prefer quiet." His mouth tightened faintly. "Perhaps I did once." He finally raised his eyes. "Lately, when you are here, it feels less empty." Her breath caught. Rowan seemed almost irritated by his own admission. "I don't understand it. I don't understand why I trust you when you have given me several reasons not to." Elara could no longer pretend the danger between them was merely recognition. Whatever existed here was becoming real under a false name. She took one step toward him. "Your Majesty, there is something." The confession reached the edge of her tongue. Then she remembered the missing record, Voss's stare, and the treaty marriage closing around Rowan's court. She stopped. Rowan watched her retreat into silence. "Something?" "No." Pain flickered across his expression before control returned. He looked toward the fire. The investigation into Elara's death was incomplete. Elara went cold. They never truly proved the body was hers. He spoke carefully, as though saying the words too quickly might destroy them. "She may have lived." Elara could hear her heartbeat. Rowan continued, "If Elara is alive, I would not punish her for leaving." His gaze returned to hers. "I would not even ask her to justify wanting freedom from me." Elara struggled to breathe. "Then what would you ask? Why she believed she had to disappear without trusting me with the choice." The words found the wound she had spent 5 years refusing to touch. She had believed leaving was sacrifice. Rowan was telling her that, to him, it had also been a decision made on his behalf. Elara nearly said his name, nearly removed every lie between them. But somewhere beyond that room, the proof she needed was still missing. She lowered her eyes. "I hope you find your answer, Your Majesty." Rowan's silence followed her out. Elsewhere in the palace, Garrick Voss received the result of his own quiet inquiry. There was no credible Mara veil matching the history the new maid had given the royal household. He read the report twice, remembering the lowered face, the familiar movements, the woman who had supposedly died 5 years before. Suspicion became something far more dangerous. Garrick Voss finally understood who had returned to Rowan Thorne's court. Garrick Voss finally understood who had returned to Rowan Thorne's court. He did not expose her. That was what frightened Elara most. 2 days later, the head housekeeper informed her that she was being transferred from the private royal wing to the western guest quarters. No explanation was given. Elara understood anyway. Before she could pack her few belongings, the order was reversed. His Majesty overruled it, the housekeeper said, clearly displeased by the unusual interference. "You remain where you are." Elara found Rowan in his study that afternoon. Neither mentioned the transfer. His eyes met hers once, steady and questioning, before returning to his work. The next pressure came through accusation. A confidential council summary disappeared temporarily, and questions spread among the servants about who had entered the royal rooms. Elara's name surfaced because of her false history and her unusual access. Her belongings were examined. Nothing was found. She had never taken documents from the palace, only memorized what she could and followed records where her duties legitimately carried her. The missing summary eventually ceased to matter, but the warning was unmistakable. Voss was tightening the space around her. He confirmed it himself the following evening. Elara was crossing an empty passage after delivering linens when he stepped from an alcove. "Mara Vale," he said. She stopped. "My lord." An interesting name. Elara kept her face blank. "It is the one I was given." "Is it?" Voss moved closer, studying her. "You should be more careful about returning to places where people remember the dead." Her pulse hammered, but she refused to retreat. "I don't understand." "Of course not." His smile held no warmth. "Then understand this. A false maid entering restricted corridors while the king is negotiating a treaty marriage would make an excellent scandal." He did not need to say her true name. And if that maid suddenly claimed to be a woman whose relationship with the king once threatened political stability? Voss continued, "Imagine how conveniently that could be described. Manipulation, infiltration, perhaps even an attempt to influence succession." Elara finally understood his leverage. Recognition alone was not enough. If she revealed herself without proof, Voss could turn the truth into the very weapon she had returned to dismantle. Stay away from matters that do not concern you, he said. And perhaps Mara Vale can quietly leave the palace. He walked away before she answered. That night Rowan was alone when Elara brought his supper. The treaty documents lay open before him. He had barely touched the previous meal. She set the tray down. You should eat. You always say that. You rarely listen. For the briefest moment, something like amusement touched his face. Then it vanished. They want my answer soon. Elara glanced at the treaty papers. About the marriage? Rowan nodded. For 5 years, every advisor has eventually reached the same conclusion. Bury the past. Marry. Produce heirs. Continue ruling. His voice remained controlled, but exhaustion lived beneath it. Most duties can be performed whether one wishes to perform them or not. Elara looked at him. And that one. I could marry. He paused. What I could not do was pretend losing her meant nothing. The room seemed suddenly too small. Rowan's gaze settled on Elara. Now there is another problem. She could barely speak. What problem? You. Elara went still. I trust you, Mara. I have no sensible reason to. And lately I have several reasons not to. His expression tightened. Yet when you enter this room, I find myself expecting the world to make more sense. Elara had imagined confessing 100 times. None had been as simple as this. Ro. She caught the name before it fully escaped. Rowan heard enough. His eyes sharpened. Elara forced herself onward. Your Majesty, I have not been entirely truthful with you. I know. There was no accusation in his voice. That made it worse. Then why haven't you demanded answers? Because whatever you are hiding, I want you to tell me because you choose to. He stepped nearer, then stopped with deliberate distance between them. No command. No alpha authority. No attempt to turn her lower station into permission. Elara wanted desperately to cross that distance. She also saw Voss's trap around them. If she confessed now without the missing evidence, Rowan would possess the truth but not the means to defend it. Once again, fear disguised itself as protection. I can't, she whispered. Hurt passed through Rowan's eyes. Can't or won't. Elara had no answer that would not become another lie. Rowan stepped back first. Then I won't force it from you. She left carrying the unbearable knowledge that he had offered her the choice she had denied him 5 years earlier, and she still had not taken it. By morning, she returned to the records she had memorized. The missing document had not vanished without a trace. Every sealed packet moving through the old council system had required a courier entry, even when its destination changed. Elara searched the surviving references until one number matched the gap in the archive sequence. The old courier ledger recorded the packet leaving the administrative archive on the night she fled. It had never reached its stated destination. A notation redirected it under council authority to a private council vault. Elara stared at the entry. The proof might still exist. Before she could reach the vault, Rowan received a sealed report of his own. Mara Vale's employment history was false. The new maid had entered restricted royal records under an identity that could not be verified. Rowan read the accusation in silence. Then he sent one order through the palace. Bring Mara Vale to him. Alone. Bring Mara Vale to him. Alone. Elara knew. The moment she entered Rowan's study that there would be no more room for careful half-truths. The sealed report lay open on his desk. Rowan stood beside it, not behind the protection of rank or ceremony, and the quiet disappointment in his face hurt more than anger could have. Mara Vale does not exist, he said. Elara closed the door behind her. Not as I described her. You entered my household under a false identity. You accessed restricted records. You lied when I asked what you were searching for. Each fact landed without accusation because none required it. Yes. Rowan watched her. I could order an investigation. I could have guards search every room you have entered. He paused. I am not doing that. I am asking you once, without command or coercion. Tell me the truth. Elara looked at the man she had spent 5 years trying to protect by denying him exactly this choice. Another lie would not protect him now. It would only prove she had learned nothing. Slowly, she removed the pins holding her darkened hair in its severe servant style. Then she took the small vial of scent-dulling herbs from beneath her collar and placed it beside the report. She had not renewed the mixture since dawn. Beneath its fading bitterness, her natural scent was beginning to return. Rowan went utterly still. Elara lifted her eyes to his. My name is Elara Vane. For several seconds, Rowan did not move. She had imagined recognition as relief, fury, perhaps disbelief. What appeared on his face was something worse. The collapse of 5 years of certainty. No, he whispered. Elara said nothing. His gaze moved over her features, the hair she had altered, the scar beside her thumb. Every detail he had noticed without allowing himself to believe. Then her returning scent reached him. Rowan stepped backward. You were alive. Yes. All this time. Yes. His jaw tightened. And you stood in this room while I spoke about mourning you. Elara could not defend herself. Yes. Rowan turned away. When he spoke again, his voice was controlled with visible effort. Why? She finally gave him the truth she had carried alone. 5 years earlier, she had discovered evidence that several powerful allies would challenge Rowan's legitimacy if he continued their relationship. She had been shown correspondence suggesting Pax would withdraw support, the council would fracture, and Rowan would eventually face a choice between keeping her and preserving the kingdom from conflict. I thought removing myself removed the weapon, she said. Rowan faced her again. So you decided for me. I thought I was saving you. You decided for me, he repeated. Elara lowered her head. Yes. The admission hurt because she finally understood what the sacrifice had cost beyond her own pain. I believed you would know I had left, she continued. I never knew they made you believe I died. Rowan's expression changed. Made me believe? Elara explained the evidence she had found since returning. The old faction correspondence, the missing record, the courier ledger showing a sealed packet diverted on the night she fled. I knew there had been a threat. I did not know someone manufactured evidence of my death afterward. Rowan stared at the report on his desk. 5 years of grief had just acquired an architect neither of them yet fully understood. Before he could answer, raised voices sounded beyond the study doors. A council officer entered after receiving permission, pale with urgency. Lord Voss had already presented the council with evidence that the king's new maid had entered the palace under a fabricated identity and accessed restricted records. He was demanding an immediate inquiry. By the time Rowan and Elara reached the council chamber, Voss had transformed her secret into an accusation. A false identity, unauthorized interest in royal documents, suspicious proximity to the king during treaty negotiations. Then he delivered the final blow. This woman claims to be Elara Vane. The chamber erupted. Elara stood beneath the same kind of scrutiny she had feared 5 years earlier. Voss argued that her return could be an attempt to influence the crown, disrupt the treaty marriage, even manipulate succession politics. Several council members demanded she be detained until her identity and motives could be established. The old nightmare had returned almost perfectly. Once again, Elara's presence beside Rowan appeared capable of destabilizing his rule. Once again, disappearing offered the simplest escape. Rowan could have ended the argument with royal authority. Instead, he looked at her. You left once because you believed staying would destroy what I had to protect. His voice was quiet enough that the council could not turn it into a performance. I will not imprison you here to prove otherwise. Elara stared at him. If you leave now, I will not stop you. The choice was hers. Truly hers. Minutes later, she stood in the narrow servants' passage she had used 5 years before. The outer door waited at the far end. Beyond it the same road toward anonymity and safety. She took several steps toward it. 5 years ago, she had called this sacrifice. Now she could see the other truth inside it. Running had protected Rowan from making a choice, but it had also denied him one. Behind her lay scandal, investigation, Voss, and the possibility that staying would cost her everything. Ahead lay freedom. Elara stopped. For the first time, she understood that the question was no longer whether Rowan would make her stay. It was whether she would choose to remain when no one was forcing her. It was whether she would choose to remain when no one was forcing her. Elara turned away from the open door. By the time she returned to the council chamber, every face turned toward her. Rowan's expression changed, but he did not move to claim her place beside him. He let her choose that too. Elara walked forward on her own. I will submit to the inquiry, she said, and I will answer for entering this palace under a false name. But before you judge why I returned, there is evidence this council has not seen. Voss leaned back in his chair. More convenient accusations? A courier ledger. Elara described the entry she had found. The sealed packet removed from the administrative archive on the night she fled and redirected under council authority to a private council vault. Voss's expression barely shifted. A 5-year-old notation proves nothing. Then open the vault. Silence followed. Several council members looked toward Rowan. Elara understood the danger immediately. If Rowan simply declared her truthful and ordered the matter closed, Voss could claim the Alpha King had placed his former lover above lawful scrutiny. Rowan understood it too. The inquiry will proceed formally, he said. The vault will be examined under council witness. Every relevant record will be entered into evidence, including those that implicate Elara. It was not the easy protection of a king shielding the woman he loved. It was riskier. Rowan was placing both of them beneath the same truth. The courier ledger was produced, and its notation verified. The corresponding section of the private vault was opened before witnesses. Inside, filed under an obsolete council authorization, was the sealed packet that should have reached the administrative archive 5 years earlier. Its contents changed the room. The political threat Elara had believed was real had been constructed from manipulated correspondence, exaggerated commitments, and coordinated claims designed to convince her that remaining beside Rowan would fracture his support. The allied pack cited as ready to abandon him had never formed the united opposition she had been shown. The plan had required something far simpler than overthrowing an Alpha King. It required convincing Elara to remove herself. She had been close enough to Rowan to notice inconsistencies in council correspondence, yet politically vulnerable enough to believe her presence could become a weapon against him. Once she disappeared, the same faction arranged evidence suggesting she had died while fleeing the capital. Rowan would grieve instead of searching. Elara would remain silent because she believed returning would endanger him. And with time, a wounded king without the woman he trusted could be pressured toward a politically useful marriage. The current treaty campaign was not a separate scheme. It was the final shape of the old one. Rowan looked toward Voss. 5 years. Voss rose. Even if these records are genuine, they do not absolve her. She entered your household under a false identity. She accessed restricted material. She deceived the crown. Elara stepped forward before Rowan could answer. He is right about that. The admission unsettled the chamber more than denial would have. I was manipulated 5 years ago, but the decision to leave was mine. Returning under another name was mine. Lying to the king was mine. She looked at Rowan. I thought loving him meant deciding what danger he should be spared. I was wrong. Voss seized on it. Then there is still a simple solution. Complete the treaty. Distance the crown from this scandal and demonstrate that the king's judgment remains independent of this woman. Everyone understood what that meant. Rowan could preserve the alliance, accept the political marriage, and allow Elara's return to become merely an unfortunate investigation from his past. It was the safer road. Rowan stood. No, the word carried through the chamber without force because it needed none. I will not repair one manipulation by submitting to another. He ordered the recovered evidence entered into formal proceedings against everyone implicated, including Voss, knowing the treaty faction could withdraw its support. Then he looked at Elara. And I will not choose you because I mourned you, because you returned, or because anyone believes a king is entitled to reclaim what he lost. Elara's eyes burned. Then why? Because now I know what you did. I know why you did it. I know what it cost me, and what my grief cost you. And knowing all of it, I still choose you. 5 years ago, Elara had believed love required her disappearance. Now staying carried the greater cost. She could face investigation, public judgment, and the consequences of every lie she had told. She could lose the position she once held and any certainty about what came next. But she would face those things as herself. Then hear my choice too, she said. I am staying. Not because you are my king. Not because you can protect me. I am staying because I will never again disappear and call it a decision made for both of us. Rowan crossed the distance between them, then stopped before touching her. The pause mattered. Elara closed it herself, taking his hand. Around them, the council chamber remained unsettled, the alliance unresolved, the consequences only beginning. None of that disappeared because the truth had been found. But Voss had lost the weapon that had worked 5 years earlier. He could no longer keep Rowan and Elara apart by making each believe separation was the only way to save the other. This time, they stood in the same room with the same truth between them. And when the choice finally came, neither made it for the other. Voss and the others named in the recovered records were removed from influence, while the council completed formal proceedings against them. Elara did not ask Rowan to spare her from the same scrutiny. Her false employment history, her entry into restricted corridors, and every action she had taken as Mara Vale were examined openly. The evidence cleared her of the betrayal Voss had tried to attach to her name and established the conspiracy behind her disappearance, but it did not erase the choices she had made. Elara accepted that. Rowan did too. The political consequences lasted beyond the inquiry. The treaty Voss had championed collapsed, and Rowan was forced to begin the slower work of rebuilding the alliance without purchasing stability through a marriage he did not want. No recovered document could return the 5 years they had lost. No council judgment could make those years painless. But Elara no longer needed to live as a dead woman. The memorial portrait was removed from the gallery. Mara Vale disappeared from the household register. Elara stopped darkening her hair and never opened the little vial of bitter herbs again. For the first time since returning, she walked through the palace carrying her own name and her own scent without preparing an escape route in her mind. Rowan offered to restore the position she had held before she vanished. Elara refused. "I'm not 22 anymore," she told him, "and I don't want to return to the exact place where everything stopped." Rowan did not argue. Instead, after the council formally cleared her name, Elara accepted an advisory position focused on correspondence and administrative review, the work her own investigation had proved she was exceptionally suited to perform. The appointment gave her authority independent of being loved by the king and responsibility independent of his favor. Their relationship rebuilt more slowly. Rowan did not treat 5 years of mourning as a claim over the woman who had returned. Elara did not expect one confession to repair the trust she had broken. When she wanted to leave a room, she left. When he wanted an answer she was not ready to give, he waited. When fear tempted her to decide what truth he could bear, she spoke instead. One evening, weeks after the inquiry ended, Rowan asked her to walk with him. They crossed the lower palace until Elara recognized the narrowing corridor ahead. She stopped. "You remember. Every step," she said. It was the servant's passage she had taken 5 years earlier. At its end stood the outer door. Rowan opened it. Evening air moved through the corridor. Beyond the threshold lay the road Elara had once followed into another life. Rowan remained beside the wall, leaving the way completely clear. "I spent years wishing I could return to this place," he said. "I imagined stopping you." Elara looked at him. "Would you have? Then? Probably." A sad smile touched his mouth. "I thought loving someone meant holding on tightly enough not to lose them." His gaze moved toward the open doorway. "I know better now." Elara understood what he was giving her. Not permission. She did not need permission. Choice. The thing neither of them had truly possessed that night 5 years ago. "If you want another life," Rowan said, "the door is open." Elara looked outside. Once, she had crossed that threshold convinced that disappearing was the greatest proof of love she could offer. She had left without allowing Rowan to choose the risk of loving her. She had denied herself the possibility that being known completely might not end in ruin. Now Rowan knew everything. He knew she had lied. He knew she had run. He knew she had stood within arm's reach while he mourned her and still could not make herself confess. He also knew why. There was no Mara Vale left between them. No false death. No political threat disguised as certainty. No missing document waiting to change what they understood. Elara stepped toward the doorway. Rowan did not move. She reached for the handle. 5 years ago, she had opened this door and walked away alone. This time, Elara looked back at the man who had refused to close it for her. Then she smiled, pulled the door shut, and remained on the inside with him.